The real estate developer phrase is really kind of a highly disparaged term, and a lot of it is self-inflicted. I think there's a lot of things that the industry did that was not very thoughtful and not very good, and so it's kind of self-imposed. But on the other hand, I think in many ways, real estate development should be the noble profession that is in place right now to solve a lot of the country or the world's wicked problems, because we are people that execute. We're people that navigate between a lot of competing interests. We take action. We don't sit around and just talk. And we want to get stuff built. Now, the question is, or I think the legacy is, that we haven't, 70s through 90s, we didn't build a lot of very good stuff. And that's why it's disparaging.
Welcome to Housing Matters, the podcast that covers everything real estate, from buying your first home to building your investment portfolio. Hosted by me, Matt Pouliot, Pouliot Real Estate. Each episode brings expert insights, smart strategies, and real talk on housing and affordability. If it's about real estate, it matters here. Today, I'm thrilled to have joining us Jim Heid, who is a built environment entrepreneur, small infill developer, author, speaker, and a founder. Jim is focused on infill development and is an advisor based in Sonoma County, California. He's known for his aspirational but practical approach, and he works with a wide range of tools and best practices to communicate the value of inspired design and sustainability within the realities of market norms. With over 40 years of experience as an urban designer, land planner, sustainability strategist, and now infill developer, he brings a broad range of perspectives and skills to the discussion about how communities can and should grow. Trained as a landscape architect, he received a master's in real estate development from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, MIT. Jim, I'm really thankful that you've made the time to join us today on Housing Matters. You've got a fascinating career path from landscape architecture to urban design to real estate development. Can you help walk the listeners through how those experiences really shaped your approach in building communities?
Yeah, glad to. And first of all, thanks for having me. It was really fun meeting you at the Build Maine conference, which I got to say was one of the best conferences I've attended this year. And I think I just finished my 26th conference last week. So it was really, really well done. It was great.
I'll be sure to pass that on to Kara. I know that she's really passionate about that work.
No, it shows. It shows, and the people she collected and the speakers and stuff were just awesome. So it was a really good use of my time, and glad I made the slog all the way from Sonoma County to Skowhegan, Maine. So, anyways, yeah, I mean, you covered a lot of it. And a quick sidelight: the first thing I ever worked on was I was based in Vermont, and one of my first projects was in Portland, Maine. So I have some route. Yeah, Congress
what was that
Square,
project?
Congress Square. I went by it on my way to Skowhegan to see how it had endured, and it looked a little tired, but it was still there. So it was good to see that. Cool. Yeah. And the museum was just coming out of the ground. We were working across the street. So, anyways.
That's awesome.
So yeah, it has, and frankly, it's always fun to reflect on this, because it's when you're busy and you're running, you don't get to reflect on how you got to where you are and the seminal moments that shape your life. And it was I started. I grew up in the Northeast. Grew up actually in Pittsburgh. And it's one of those things when you're young, you don't realize what's imprinting on you. But I do remember going into the city, seeing old industrial buildings, driving along the river, kind of fascinated with, I think, buildings and stuff like that. Then we moved to Albany, New York, and I was really in love with a lot of the old kind of threadbare, bombed out, industrial mill towns like Troy and Schenectady and all that kind of stuff. And left there to go to school, and went to Idaho because I don't know, had this romantic notion about the West, and discovered landscape architecture and realized it wasn't just planting plans around houses, but actually, dealing with scale and dealing with, larger contextual matters. And then came back east to work because it was one of the recessions that I've lived through, and there weren't a lot of jobs. So I ended up in Springfield, Vermont. And which turned out to actually be a great experience because it was an engineering firm. I think it's still around, Dufresne Henry. I think they're owned by one of the big firms now. But the thing that was great about that was it was a multidisciplinary engineering firm. So as a landscape architect, I could walk down the hall and talk to the electrical engineer, the structural engineer, the civil engineer. And so immediately was thrust into a world where collaboration and access to other disciplines was just an integral way of working, as opposed to, when you go to a kind of a purist firm and then you're kind of fighting for fees and all that kind of stuff. Spent 2 years there. I called my 2 years in exile because there wasn't, for a young kid out of college that was single, there wasn't a lot going on in Springfield, Vermont. I guess I hear it's kind of some cool stuff happening now, but went to Mardi Gras, fell in love with New Orleans, showed up, said, I don't care what they pay me, I'm going to get a job here, and got a job about 3 months later. And so worked there for 4 or 5 years. And in that, probably in terms of stops along the way, was probably the most impactful in terms of thinking about design and place and urbanism and the value of neighborhoods.
Why was that so?
New Orleans is it's an amazing fabric. First of all, it's an amazing fabric. I mean, just the design, the houses, the streets, the mixture of housing types on any given block. I mean, all the things that we talk about now in terms of urbanism, it just oozes it, any street that you walk down. Our offices were down in the warehouse district, which was kind of, one of these being rediscovered old industrial areas. So great building stock and, finding new life as housing and entertainment that had just been sitting fallow forever. But it's also a city where the integrity and I think the legacy of the neighborhoods is really, really strong. I mean, people, have lived there for generations. There are the corner restaurants that are the really great, secret places to eat. So everybody thinks of New Orleans and Bourbon Street, but that's the tourist view. Get up to the Garden District, get out and out of Baywater and some of those are by water. So it's such a rich place. And I was also working in a firm that one of our projects was the World's Fair, which nobody attended. Oh, wow. So it was a complete financial disaster, but it was an incredible exploration. And the firm probably attracted some of the best talent in the country at that time to work on that. So it was just a heady, exciting time to be around talented people in this really rich, influential city, eating great food, drinking way too much, just living, a much better life than I was in Springfield, Vermont. Let's put it that way. So
that's quite a juxtaposition for sure.
It is, and it was great. And I think the other thing was there was something in there that really connected with me, and I didn't realize it. There was something about the place. The attention, you'd go to people's houses, you'd sit around, you'd go out for like a 4-hour dinner, and then you'd spend 3 hours the next day sitting around talking about it. There was just this love of life and place that was, unmatched, and really.
It's all those French people down there, Jim.
French and Creoles and Cajuns and everything else. Yeah. So, and then I moved to Denver and worked for a design workshop, which is, now become a very big influential landscape architecture firm. Did a stop from there in Phoenix, went down to open the Phoenix office. And then, as I jokingly say, I went back to grad school, as you noted, to get a real estate degree because I was tired that most of the stuff I was drawing never got built. And so it was like, okay, what is it about as a designer that I'm not communicating to my clients the value of good design and the value of experimenting, and or what don't I understand about the forces of economics, insurance, process that is precluding them from doing the things that, are really great ideas, So anyway, so it was
a practical architect.
Yeah. So it was really influential to me. And, and one of the reasons I went kind of later in my life than most people do for a master's is I was in this constant tension of, do I get an advanced design degree? Do I get a business degree? Which way do I go? And I finally decided rounding out my passion for design with business understanding was what I wanted to do. And it was, I would say it was like learning a foreign language. It's like, oh, that's how the world makes decisions. There's this thing called net present value and internal rate of return. And it's like, okay, if I could speak that language and translate the things about good design into that language, going to a foreign country and be able to talk what you want, be able to say what you want for dinner in their language, maybe you'll actually get what you want. So
I think this is like a super important thing to stay on for just a moment. I just recently was meeting with a friend of mine who's an architect in Portland, great firm that he's with called Woodhull here, very forward-thinking group. But he was sharing with me like, hey, maybe at some point I'd like to have my own firm, but as an architect, they don't really teach us about the business side. And I think oftentimes different codes get created, different things in the name of safety or better for the environment, which are all worthy. However, people often aren't looking at the economic side of it and saying, like, can the area actually financially support this beyond, folks that maybe have high net worths?
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, when I was in school, kind of profit and money were kind of dirty words because, you were doing the noble thing. And I think the professions have become much more savvy about business, especially the design firms. But I think they don't understand until you've been through a project, all of the forces that the people that are delivering, the developers, all the forces that they have to deal with. I mean, I remember when I went back to grad school and I was like, I'm just going to kill it here. It's like I've got 15 years and I worked for these great firms and I've been around the country. And I walked in there and like, oh my God, I was like so over my skis, and we're doing finance and we're doing corporate finance. It's like, none of the stuff that you get any exposure to and realize that this is, again, how 90% of the world makes its decisions. And I just spent 15 years where all of the conversations in the echo chamber of our firms was about, placemaking and good design and all these things that do matter, but they're 10% of the delivery process, not the 95% that we think they are. So
interesting.
The funny aside on that, though, that I'll add to that is, so first semester, there's a lot of finance and all that. And like I said, I was way over my skis and it was a real struggle. And there were a number of people who came from finance backgrounds. So they were my buddies and they helped me get through. And so then the next semester, there was a, design course, and because of my background, I didn't have to take it, but I got to TA it. And I used to love on Monday all of these finance guys that were so smart and would run circles around me. They'd show up on Monday, like they hadn't slept for 2 days. And like, oh my God, I was up all weekend and I still don't know if I have the answer right. And I'm like, yeah, that's the problem with design, because math, I mean, it either adds up or it doesn't.
Right.
But in design, you keep iterating and you don't know if you got it right or not. And so
until the math guy ruins it.
Until the math guy. Well said. Yeah, exactly. So anyway, so it was kind of a funny turnaround. And for me, it did kind of manifest the distinction between, the black and white nature of math. And there's unfortunately a lot of people in the world that in our world, I think the built environment world, where they're driven by not just the profit, but the simplicity and the certainty of having a formula that either is correct or not correct. And as designers and as placemakers and as people that care about places where we live, we're dealing in a subjective world about what makes a place great and how does this evolve over time. And we don't know if it's going to be right, for 10 years after we cut the ribbon. So it's a very, it's a very different way of thinking about and being willing to take risks versus not take risks because I did the math and it doesn't add up. So we're not going to do that. So.
Yeah, interesting. And so from there in Denver, you somehow made it over to California.
Yeah, so there was Denver, Phoenix, then the year at MIT, and then went to work, got the job in San Francisco. And another funny story. So I graduate and I've got 2 offers. I've got one in San Francisco and I've got one in Oklahoma City. And so I sit down with my wife, the dutiful husband, and say, okay, I got these 2 offers. She says, like, why are we even having this conversation? Why wouldn't we be going to San Francisco? So now that Oklahoma City has become kind of a hot place, I don't know, maybe
you could have designed the tallest skyscraper in the world there, maybe.
Yeah. So anyway, I went to work for a firm and really it was back into the consulting world. But spent my time sitting between the designers in the firm and our clients who were private sector, or at least the ones I was working in private sector and to some degree public sector, doing that translation thing, trying to make sure both people understood the value, the challenges that our clients were facing, the value that the designers were bringing, and also, and this is a big thing I do now and really feel strongly about because I continue to do a lot of that advisory work. I think there are so many design firms who are focused on doing drawings and diagrams that will look great in their portfolio, not like how am I going to make my client make the best decision. So I'm really kind of, pretty ruthless about, we don't need that drawing. We need this so we can make a good decision. So
Mm-hmm.
that was what, and I spent a lot of time now working with what I call legacy clients, which are people who own unique land assets. They want to use real estate to do something interesting and positive for the community. They don't understand real estate. And so a lot of times my role is helping them define their values and purpose, and then select the firm that is culturally correct with what they want. There's a lot of firms that have skill parity, but they may not be a good fit from a chemistry standpoint. So trying to play that matchmaker and then really guiding that process so it's efficient and explores. And I think really what I find with many of these legacy clients is they want to learn and be involved in the decision making, not just have the black cape designer come in and say, oh, I stayed up all night and here's the answer. And so for them, it's a journey that they want to be on. So it's finding the right firm and then helping guide them on that journey.
That's great.
And then I just started doing my own things on the side, like many small developers. It was kind of a weekend passion. It was a craft. It was a chance to maybe build the balance sheet. And one thing led to another. And we talk about, that as we get maybe further into the deck.
Yeah, definitely.
But, yeah.
All great stuff and a wonderful view. It's interesting as you talk, I think about, we just recorded an episode that will air before yours from a professor at Colby College here in Maine, who's, when he was studying for his doctorate, was looking at the San Francisco fire of 1906 and, like how that community rebuilt in the wake of that versus what's going on now with Cal Rebuild type of situation.
Interesting. Yeah.
And how zoning impacts that. And then the one that we just did was with Origin Studios, which is actually delivering a lot of ADUs to California right now, based out of Massachusetts. They have a beautiful design aesthetic and so forth, but just a really smaller up and coming, firm. So there seems to be a lot of things pointing toward California as maybe areas that we should look at for some inspiration and, but definitely
and cautionary tales.
And cautionary tales. Not enough water out there. Pick up your sticks.
Yeah.
But you are really often talk about this building small and rebranding the developer's role as kind of a built environment entrepreneur. I'm curious what you mean by that and how it might change perceptions of how developer works, because we live in this culture of NIMBYism, like don't do it, can't do it. Like, is there a way to change that narrative through this approach?
Yeah, I think there's two ideas to unpack in there. One is kind of just the whole building small approach, and the other is this kind of nomenclature and intentional distinction of built environment entrepreneur versus real estate developer. So let me tackle that one first. And it was a little bit when I was kind of rebranding and the book was coming out. I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do in essentially my next chapter. The real estate developer phrase is really kind of a highly disparaged term. And a lot of it is self-inflicted. I think there's a lot of things that the industry did that was not very thoughtful and not very good. And so it's kind of self-imposed. But on the other hand, I think in many ways, real estate development should be the noble profession that is in place right now to solve a lot of the country or the world's wicked problems, because we are people that execute. We're people that navigate between a lot of competing interests. We take action. We don't sit around and just talk. And we want to get stuff built. Now, the question is, or I think the legacy is, that we haven't, 70s through 90s, we didn't build a lot of very good stuff. And that's why it's disparaging. But the reason I like the word built environment entrepreneur is two things. So if you look at the definition of the term real estate, it's like all immovable, tangible assets, it's yada, yada, yada. And if you look at built environment, the definition is, the physical surroundings that allow humanity to thrive. And so do I want to spend my life doing immovable assets, or do I want to build places that allow humanity to thrive? So definitely that. And the entrepreneur part is important because largely the building small movement is a collection of entrepreneurs. It's people that do not want to have consciously chosen to not work in a corporate or institutional way. And I think that the formulaic nature of real estate, which is, there's a lot of reasons that's happened, from capital to regulations to efficiency, doesn't serve, I think, a lot of us very well, because we do need entrepreneurial people, people that are willing to take risks, people that are nimble, people that are creative, and you succeed on those aspects by working at a smaller scale. I often talk about building small as incremental, experimental. And what I mean by that is you get to try things at a much smaller scale and prove them out and get the community to understand what you're talking about, rather than trying to bet on 200,000 square feet and you can't get it approved, or you build it and you realize you missed the market by 50%. So this idea of incremental experimentalism is a really important part of the ethos of building.
I like that you mentioned that, because we're working on a project, my partner and I, with 63 acres of land here in Maine to create a new community. And we could do a lot with 63 acres, but we're intentionally starting with just a small first phase proof of concept. Hopefully it works. We believe it will. But it's tempting to be like, oh, I have all this land. I've got to do a master plan community all at once and eat the whole elephant all at once. And it's like, well, you might spend a lot of money on pre-development costs that end up going nowhere, whereas just get some shovels in the ground, see how it's going, and then build on that.
Yeah, absolutely. And not only is it tempting to do the master plan because it's fun to dream big, and there's all these great, designers that'll do these lovely watercolors and all that. A lot of times the regulatory environment forces you to do that. And that's the thing that I'm in some ways really frustrated with. And kind of when I get the soapbox, I think we've gotten to a place where the regulatory environment is telling you have to predict with certainty what those 63 acres will look like in 15 years, because the residents want to know every single thing that could possibly happen. And so you squeeze out innovation. You finally get it approved 3 years later at great cost. So now you've got all these built-in costs that have to be recovered through the price of the housing. So now the housing's more expensive. And by the time it's approved, the market has shifted, 20 degrees laterally. And what you thought you wanted to build is no longer, what the market wants. So the ability to do kind of incremental and experimental is important. I am a big believer, though, in those settings, that creating the framework, and the framework of the public realm that actually endures but allows you to move and be nimble with what you put inside that framework, is kind of the happy medium, or maybe the Goldilocks solution between long-term planning, so it just doesn't turn out to be a dog's breakfast of whatever the latest trend is. It has some continuity. The big ideas are there. The community spaces and the public connection, the fabric makes sense, is legible, is clear, but you're not held to such a strict standard in what's going on within that framework that you can't pivot and you can't be creative and you can't try different things.
So more like performance-based zoning instead of prescriptive zoning.
Well, definitely not prescriptive zoning, and I'm not even sure I'd call it performance. I call it frameworks, structural frameworks. They do this really well in Canada, and done some work up there, and they're really big on kind of the structural frameworks and then letting stuff to go. Another really good project that's interesting, I don't know if you've ever seen Prospect in, I think it's in Broomfield, Colorado, but it's an interesting case study in changing tastes and product types over time. And the short story is, it was a family-owned nursery. Guy went to Kentlands, which was one of Dwani's early projects, hired Dwani to do kind of the Western version of Kentlands. And they laid out a really good framework. But as they were, and so if you go to the original part of it, it's very historicist in terms of the architecture, and it's really lovely. But over time, the owners / developers, I want to be a little more creative with the architecture. I want to do some more contemporary stuff. I'm kind of tired of all this historic stuff. So they actually pivoted on product type and design and everything else. So there's this really interesting portfolio of design typologies, and it looks a little, pretty widely wild versions of architecture. But the thing that holds it all together are the streetscapes, where the parks are located, the hierarchy of open spaces, and how those all work. So it's a great example of a really solid framework that endured as tastes and program changed over time.
Well, I really like your approach to this new phraseology around built environment entrepreneur, because I don't really know the last time a post-secondary school that I'm familiar with offered a degree that's called real estate developer. I recognize that you have that as an option when you get to a master's level, But the irony is there's many people who choose to be entrepreneurs right out of high school. And if they're told and given permission, it's okay to be a built environment entrepreneur. That might mean house hacking. That might mean like doing different things other than building skyscrapers or what some people might connote with real estate development. Certainly we don't have any skyscrapers here in Maine, but it's one of these things that I think oftentimes people don't navigate into the waters of doing development because they almost don't feel like they have permission to do it because they didn't go to school for it. And it's like, it's actually really not a great school for that unless you're, getting to the master's level.
Right. And there's not a school for it, and they're not given permission. And it's like, well, what is the process? And many of the developers that I really respect, they are generalists because they are pulled. In fact, I'm surprised that whenever I'd meet these people who were really influential and doing amazing work, and you say, well, I had a liberal arts background, or, they were great readers and they, loved literature and they drew from a lot of things, but they were, the classic case of the generalist or the conductor who could pull together all these disciplines. And as the world gets more complex in terms of both regulations and desires and asks from the community, you need somebody who can both communicate and coordinate all of those different aspects into some kind of a cohesive whole. So
yeah, absolutely. Well, you've worked really quite extensively with ADUs and cluster development. And how do these smaller scale approaches fit into both urban and rural context? And what are kind of some of the keys to get communities on board?
Yeah, so one of the, I guess, really, what do I say, seminal, I use that word a lot, but seminal projects, and it really was a milestone for me. It was kind of a bit of an accomplishment of, long-term vision, stuff like that, was the RiverHouse project, which maybe, I think I showed that in the main slides, but so 12-unit cottage court. And I always loved the cottage court. First of all, I've always loved residential. There's something about
how does cottage court work when there's snow, like Vermont and Maine? That's what I was wondering during your presentation.
Oh, in terms of removal?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I was gonna say, well, why wouldn't it work? But yeah, you got to remove it.
Not in California, no problem.
Yeah, but I think there's quite a few of them out there. There's a group out of Providence, Union Studios, that does some great cottage court work, and I think
I'm super curious about learning more about that.
Yeah, but you're right. We do have the benefit of not having some of those externalities like snow to deal with, but. And I think there's a fascination, and it's great to see the level of uptake on cottage courts because it is in many ways the most appealing gentle density that you can think of, and in a lot of ways the most, from a development standpoint, maybe the most appealing exit strategy because they are independent buildings and you can sell them.
Yeah, for those listening who might not be familiar with cottage court, maybe a brief synopsis on that.
Yeah, so a cottage court is, it's a collection of units. Could be detached, or they could be duplexes and attached. But the main idea is you organize them around some kind of a central green space or major green space, and you're essentially borrowing from what would normally be people's private space in the backyard to and putting it into a collective space. And as I learned with my project, and you can, I don't know if I think we sent you a link. You can probably link it in this, but
we'll share that with the viewers.
Yeah, so you can look at it. There's a pretty nice summary booklet of it. But the key in this is you end up finding a self-selecting audience that actually does want that deeper sense of community than they would get in a typical tract home. And so the story I always tell is when I brought my project to market and people would come out, and universally people loved it. It shows really well. It's a lovely environment. There were a lot of existing trees that we built around. So it felt like it won a bunch of national awards for it. And one of the jurors said the trees allowed you to cheat history, which I thought was a great phrase because it just felt like it had been there for 40 years versus just opened, that day. But people would come out and they universally loved it. And then one or two conversations would happen. The first conversation would go like this. It's like, oh, I love this idea. And I love being able to see my neighbors. And, we travel a lot so they could have my keys and look after the place. And I'd be sitting on the porch and they'd come by and want to have a cocktail. And that's great. Or people would say, this is really interesting. And, I love the fact that everybody knows each other, but I don't want to be sitting on my front porch and have somebody come by and want to have a cocktail. So those people did not buy. The first group did buy. So there was an inherent ability and desire to connect. And so in very short order, it became everybody moved from somewhere else. Nobody else knew each other when they moved in, but there was an immediate connection where they were doing dinners together. They'd have happy hours out in the green. They would go to music together. And so that notion that as designers, built environment entrepreneurs, can you build community? As much as I preached that for years until I actually finished that project, I wasn't sure, and it really does work. Because again, you get you're signaling to the market the values by which this project is based on, and it finds those people who want those values in their life, and so they naturally gravitate towards it, and then it becomes a snowball effect. So
I thought it was interesting in your presentation, and for those most people listening who weren't able to be there, you talked about the need for like a fire lane, and this is the running up in codes, right? And I seem to recall someone on the planning said to you, like, hey, this is not going to work or whatever. Why would you do this design? They're not going to sell. And you're like, it's my risk. Like, I'm the one taking all the risk here. I'm just asking for your permission to do it. A little bit on that would be helpful, I think, for folks, because I found that really interesting.
Yeah, so there's two stories in there. One was one of dealing with the jurisdiction, and in these tighter, more what I call Swiss watchmaking projects, where every little piece has to fit together, versus a typical tract development where you just carve a big enough lot that if something's off by 2 feet, it doesn't really matter. In this case, every inch matters. The fire access usually becomes one of the biggest challenges to solve. And so we were solving it with two kind of neo-traditional, they're effectively alleys that served as a fire lane. And we ran into a challenge. Once we were ready to start construction, the fire department said we had too long of a fire lane per the code. And the solution became one of semantics, where what was originally a 220-foot fire lane became a 150-foot fire lane and a 70-foot driveway, which just meant a slight paving difference. So when you're dealing at this scale and you're dealing at these complexity, every word on your submittal documents matters, and you need to think through that with, ideally the thought partners that have to review it, so they have the cover that you're meeting code, but are aligned with you in terms of the intent of what you're trying to do. The other piece of the story you were talking about is, so we had in the middle, we had one house that was focused on the green, and it was a really critical part of the program because it was the 8th unit. And the thing about small scale development and those few units, you don't make any money until that last one sells. So, you gotta get that unit, you gotta sell it. And we went to planning commission. And this is, another one of the challenging things, these smaller scale developments. You have planning commissioners, if they're not trained in design, if they tend to hold a little more conventional view of the world, don't want to experiment, they start to do what you would call me search. And me search is, instead of research, it's like, well, what would I like? And so there's one commissioner went off on a tangent about how she would never walk that far from the garage, which was about 100 feet, to the house. She would never carry her groceries in the rain from the garage to the house. Who's going to do that? You need to put the garage next to the house, and that would have completely upended the pedestrian nature of this design. So we, kind of arm wrestled for about 15 minutes at the dais about it. And my response was, that's a market risk question. That's not a code issue. And while your personal perception is you would not want to live there, you are not my market. And I'm the developer and I'm taking the market risk. And if it doesn't sell, that's on me. That's not on you. So, stick to your lane, look at what's in the code, and let me try it. And the epilogue on it is that's the house that sold for the most, because of all the other attributes. So this notion that people who play an important role in the process as reviewers and as commissioners that maybe don't really understand how the markets are changing and are unwilling to try risks, or they're completely wedded to what they want versus what the next generation might want, can be challenged to clear some of these things, and you just have to kind of work through it. So. Yeah.
And to your point, these are oftentimes these personal or me decisions that are made. And one way in which we in Maine have tried to kind of overcome this when I was in the legislature was with a bill that we had called LD 2003 to basically create accessory dwelling units by right. And I know in California, you've been doing a lot of work to help out with the state legislature adopt some legislation there. There was Cal Bill 1127. I'm not sure how you refer to your bills in California, but 1127. What kind of effect do you think that will have out there? What are you hoping that has?
Yeah. Well, I think after a long slog of legislative efforts, I think this could be one of the real breakthrough bills. And if you bear with me, I just want to do a quick recap of where we've been legislatively, because I think it is important. So the first one, as you mentioned, I think 2017, the state passed some pretty aggressive ADU legislation, and it made some major changes. I'm not sure what's in your bill, but the big things were no parking required, setbacks dropped to 4 feet. You could increase the footprint size. And the big thing was the second story only had to have a 4-foot setback, which really made ADUs above garages really, really helpful. It also limited the fees that the jurisdiction could charge for an ADU. And so to put that in tangible dollars, where I live, originally to do an ADU was about a $25,000 in impact fees. It immediately went down to $3,000. Wow. And the reason it went down to $3,000 is the city was pretty progressive about this, but they looked at it and they said, an ADU is really just an extra bedroom that's not attached to the house, but it has a kitchen. So why are we charging fire and water and sewer and all that kind of stuff impacts? Really all you're doing is adding a kitchen. So the impacts that you have on any of our infrastructure is related to adding a new kitchen, and that's what the fees should reflect. So I thought that was pretty good. So that was passed, and just fast forward, I just did a presentation the other day that I think is really fascinating. So that passed in 2017. In 2022, 20% of all new housing units built in California was an ADU. Wow. So I mean that is
clearly economics driving that,
Well, it's economics, and it's and frankly, a lot of those are coming from merchant builders that see that it's a real value add for people that are buying. It's both the optionality, the flexibility, and also the economic value that it creates. But
so the merchant builders building the ADU right in as a separate dwelling
exactly
right out of the gate. So you're getting a 2-for-1 on the same site.
Right. And people love it because they can rent, the obvious things, they can rent it out, and that can offset their mortgage costs. So they're kind of getting, better, they're being able to buy more house. I mean, the RiverHouse, I had 4 ADUs and 8 single family homes. So it was a great control set because I had 4 without and 4 with, and we could test to see how much the market premium was and why people bought them. And people were buying them for most of the reasons you would think: boomerang kids, in-laws wanting to live there, guest houses, and rental income. But the one that I hadn't thought of that was a really popular reason was one of the partners had declining health, and they saw it as a way that the caretaker could live on property, but not in the house. And in California, where housing is expensive, it could be part of the package for a caregiver to actually be there. So it's an important thing in an aging environment to think about that.
Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting one, particularly here in Maine, where we have the oldest population in the United States.
Right. That's what I was thinking about.
That's a great marketing idea. Thanks for sharing that. So
so ADUs happened, and then they did SB 9, which was this as of right, you as an owner could split your lot into 2 ministerially, and then you could add another single family house and an ADU. So basically what was a single family house, you could convert to 4 units. But one of the handcuffs in it was you had to, as the owner, you had to live there for 3 years. And it didn't get a lot of uptake because most, homeowners that have had their property for a long time they're not developers in the process of going to get a bank and manage a contractor and all that. So it didn't see the level of uptake that they wanted. And then there were a whole series of things that they did, but the next big, I think, moment was one that was, SB 684. And this was the opportunity to ministerially subdivide a lot that was under 5 acres that was in an urban context into 10 units or less, which, was pretty significant. And the minimum
10
lot
lots
size
or 10 units?
10 lots. Wow. So you could sell them and you didn't have to go through any discretionary approval. And it was, but in the 11th hour, some of the local jurisdictions put up a stink, and they carved it back so that the handcuffs were it had to be zoned multifamily, And I'm trying to think what the other limitation was. So while it had a lot of promise, it still was somewhat limiting. And then on July 3rd, the governor just changed that so that it also includes sites that are zoned single family that are vacant. And I think that's going to be a real game changer, because
you see this in LA when they rebuild now? Because I was asking the professor about this. Are they going to build more dense, more units, or is it going to be all a bunch of single family again?
I think it could. An interesting corollary that everybody seems to forget is in 2017, Sonoma County had a wildfire that was probably in some ways more impactful and more devastating than LA. We lost 5,000 homes. I think we lost 5% of our housing population, and it just wiped out entire neighborhoods. And
plus a lot of grapes. That's depressing for the wine.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. Given where wine is right now, losing some grapes might not be such a bad idea. And so there were a lot of these conversations, because a lot of these were somewhat older subdivisions, very much in the sprawl ethos. And there were a lot of conversations about, okay, now's our chance to, build back better and do new urbanism and more walkable and whatever else. And when you have people that are so emotionally scarred, it's like, no, I just want my home back. I just want what I had. I want it as quickly as possible, and I want to forget this whole experience. So while things got built very quickly, impressively quickly, it all pretty much came back the way it was. Now, none of these rules existed at that time. And I was just on a call with some friends, actually a classmate from LA, and they are buying up some of the lots and trying to use 684 and 11827 to potentially do more density. So we'll see how that goes. But I do feel like after years of fiddling with the legislative language and everything else, we're getting to something that could have a lot of impact and get us to a point where we are actually building at scale and able to more efficiently get these creative projects, this gentle density, done in a much more efficient manner. So.
Interesting. Yeah, it does really seem that ADUs are starting to break into that more. One thing that I've thought about is, we are adding this on as to the same existing lot, but it seems that if we could just all agree that we're still using the same amount of land, why can't we further subdivide that so that then they can have, fee simple interest in their home and get a loan on it?
Right.
If it were sold as a separate unit, maybe that's the next iteration of where this all goes, because it does seem to me that there is an apprehension among American people with a ton of, stuff made in China that's probably cheaper than what we need. And we don't value things as much anymore.
Yeah.
So we collect a lot, right? And subsequently, the home sizes, I think in 1950 were somewhere around 900 square feet, and now they're around 2,400. So it's like we either need to come to this realization that we're going to need smaller units and smaller spaces and collect less things. That's a big social nut to crack. Or we just do it, and that's what's available, and it works because you can actually get a loan on it. And I find that a lot of folks here, or just in general, seem to be hung up on how do I make the economics work if I already own my home, versus what I'm hearing from you is a lot of builders are kind of like building that in. So in time, it will come to fruition because it's already with the property. But for the people, the millions of people that own homes, or let's say the baby boomer cohort that's sitting on 14.9 trillion in equity in this country, how do we empower them to unlock that in a way that creates housing when they're okay with doing it? Because even when the laws are on the books, I think a lot of people just get confused. Like you talked about cutting up the homes, they're not developers. It seems maybe it's more going to be driven by the builder community reaching out and saying, did you know this was a thing you could do? And here's how we're going to make it happen. But I'm curious your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think, I think the initial notion of the ADU legislation was we would create this, we would democratize housing development, and citizen developers everywhere would become part of the solution. And again, the thing that I find through the small scale developer ethos and just going around the country and talking is, and it's a big part of my book, which is, I would say the majority of the population is risk adverse, and development is all about managing risk. It's not like, hey, I don't care about risk. I'm living on the edge. It's just, it's like you're comfortable with risk and you know how to manage it. And so if I'm a homeowner and I've lived in my house for 40 years and I'm a dentist or an accountant or whatever else, I mean, the notion of taking on development risk, even if I'm just building an ADU, is pretty hard to get your head around. So there were a number of intermediaries that came in, especially out here. There were a whole bunch of people that either they were bootstrappy or they went out and raised a bunch of money and they were going to be the ADU deliverer, and you just hire them and it was a one-stop shop and they'd get it approved and they'd build it. And but you had to bring the financing to the table. And I think there was a gap there because people, again, didn't know how to get the money. Banks weren't loaning. I think there's a couple now that actually will loan for ADUs, but the rest of the industry components had not been created to support it once that stepped in. And then, of course, obviously, there were people that tried to do it with modular. And I think they've all had some success, but it hasn't been a runaway success, because if I am a builder / developer and my business model is to deliver ADUs in people's backyards, I mean, every one of those is bespoke, and maybe it's $400,000 to do it. And if I'm getting a 10% development fee on it, I mean, that's not a lot of money. So for a lot of and you're dealing with people who are unsophisticated in the construction world. So you're trying to get them to make decisions, or you're trying to get them to get out of the way or whatever else. So I think it's a lot of effort for, a fairly small amount of delivery. So having the ability for merchant builders to essentially, if they're developing a 100-unit subdivision and suddenly turn that into 200 units, is kind of I think what we're seeing, a lot of. And, or if you're doing infill, like I did, 1 acre, 1.2 acres, 12 units, 8 of which were single family homes and 4 of which were ADUs. Now you've got some texture and grain that fit into an existing neighborhood, but it actually creates, 10 units to the acre in a very, very effective ways.
Yeah, and on the East Coast and other parts of the country for sure, but predominantly here, given the textile industry and paper making industry in the past, we have all these old mills, that are also great infill opportunities to create more units. But then when you go to the planning board to get the number of units you want, they're like, well, we don't have enough parking for that. And so, I mean, these are some of the things that I think are starting to change the needle. I'm advocating for a lot of people to start small as well with house hacking. Maybe you buy a ranch style home with a daylight basement and you put an ADU in the basement. But if you had 1,000 people a year just in one state doing that, there's 1,000 units with very little government subsidy, getting created. So
you're creating wealth across a lot of different people. It's adding to their balance sheet. So I mean, that's the other thing that's important.
And it allows people then entering into a fixed income time frame in their life to maybe supplement their income a little. It seems the biggest apprehension is like whether they want to be a landlord or not.
Right. Yeah. Well, that comes being a landlord of 3 rental units. I get it.
Yeah. So I want to make sure to get to a couple other things that we're talking about. It's been a great conversation so far, and I don't want to miss out on a couple of other things. But so you've mentioned that housing, it's important that it's not just a storage box. I mean, how can you foster really thoughtful design and creating a connection between neighbors and shaping the community? And I think you did that, and we talked a little bit about that with your development in Sonoma County, but.
Yeah, well, it's another thing about the kind of ethos of the built environment entrepreneur that I usually try to share as well, which is, as developers, we're in a business that touches people every single day. So if you're doing stocks and bonds, it's this kind of ephemeral thing that you don't really see the impacts of. But as built environment entrepreneurs, we're touching people every day, and we have a responsibility to do it really well.
I love that.
I think there are. Unfortunately, so there's 2 futures here. One is, and it's not that everything is going to be built small. That's all I'm trying to do with the Building Small movement, is to elevate it as an alternative to what has been the corporate institutional approach to most of what's been built over the last 20 years. So trying to elevate this so there's a little better balance. One of the downsides potentially of building small in a lot of this legislation is if people don't focus on good design, and we end up with a lot of really crappy small buildings around the country, people are going to push back and say, oh, we don't want any more of that small stuff. We got to, and we're going to be back to where we were. So I think it's really incumbent on people who are at the vanguard of this and really believe in this to make sure you're paying attention to good design and bringing good designers to the table. And it doesn't have to cost more. It's about proportion and material and again, how the buildings engage with the public realm. So don't just, because you can fit a set of townhomes on a lot now and get 4 on, just don't stack a blank end up against the sidewalk. Make sure that's an end that's has visibility. It has some openings. It feels like it belongs. At RiverHouse, we had 2 of the houses that it was the side of the house that was on the public street, but very intentionally looks like the front of the house. I mean, there's a door, there's an address, there's a porch that wraps around, because the real front of the house was on the green space. And that's where, again, the kind of sub neighborhood was being created. But it was important to also talk to the street, is a phrase I use, the house talks to the street. And I think so many times, builders just like, oh, well, that's the side of the house, so we put a few bathroom windows in there, and that's it. It's like, no, it is the side of the house the way the floor plan works, but it's actually the front of the house the way the public sees it. So you have a responsibility to make it look like and do the work of being the front of the house on the public street. So
I love that.
We were in one of the, I do these small scale forums around the country twice a year. And so one of the cities we went to, we were seeing this emerging developer program, really heartfelt, developers of color working in the neighborhoods they grew up in. And first project this guy was doing is like, yeah, I couldn't afford to hire an architect, so I kind of did this. And like everybody in our group was like, no, you can't afford not to hire an architect, because you really need to get this right. So,
well, I'll be hitting you up after this call, because in our community, we definitely need a good landscape architect. I'm sure up to the job. So from your perspective, I'm always curious, because I too am trying to somewhat be like an ambassador for better practices, if you will, and also doing projects myself. So that helps add a certain lens. But I'm just kind of curious, from your perspective, what is the most effective way for developers or community members to engage with planning boards? Because I think that you can reduce a lot of risk and find alignment before you even go there and the pitchforks start coming out. And this seems to be this is kind of one of the core things that I've been trying to work on or talk about, because it's like, first of all, let's start calling people built environment entrepreneurs, not developers. That's huge. I love that. I'm going to steal that if that's okay. Probably change my LinkedIn profile. But also, like, how do we, there's 2 sides to this. There's the built environment entrepreneur coming, but also the planning board member that I was on the vice chair of the planning board locally. I know that we don't get any training. It's like, you signed up, you'll be there Tuesday at 6, you'll get the thing, you review it. Oftentimes no background in, I certainly wasn't a developer when I was 23 on the planning board in Augusta, I had like a duplex. So for me, I didn't really know this, the water main needs to be that big because so-and-so, and then that's going to do all this stuff that you learned, at MIT. And so I'm just kind of curious, like, how do we kind of improve this?
Yeah. Well, I use again the RiverHouse case study, because I do think it's a case study that I call thought partnership, not policy. And one of the, I think it's great, all the policy stuff, and we talked about the different legislation that's going on, but I think there is this somewhat false hope that, hey, we'll just change the code and suddenly everything will get easy and the floodgates will open, we'll get all this housing. And I've got some projects where all of the codes are in my favor, but I've got a jurisdiction that doesn't want it to happen, and they find a loophole to do that. Versus I've been places where I had none of the codes in my favor, but I had a thought partner at the city planning staff and with the city management, and we got it done by looking between the lines of the code and stuff like that. So I think that is the biggest part of the next wave, that we still have a long way to go. And to answer your question, I think the way it starts, there's probably 3 key pieces. One is you've got to get the city to take the lead in educating their commissioners and their leaders and the community at the same time. So back to the RiverHouse project, I had the benefit, was fortunate enough to spend a year before I even started that project as a consultant to the city, teaching the community on housing economics and doing a series of workshops on what are the different product types that are out there. And it ended with a like a real-time voting workshop, like what do we want to see more of? And the thing that won was cottage courts. So then as the built environment entrepreneur, I come in and say, hey, I want to build a cottage court. Remember y'all like those? Well, I want to build that. So I become the facilitator and not the adversary. I'm actually just doing what the community said. And the advice I give starting developers, coming out of that is if your project is the vehicle by which a community has a conversation about what it wants to be, you will never get it built. So it really is incumbent on the public sector to have those conversations first. And then as developer, you can come in and demonstrate that you're just following through on what the community has asked for. The second piece of it is there will always be people, it's probably 20% of the audience that will be the loudest and you will never convince. And a lot of people naively think, well, if I sit down and have coffee and maybe I can convince them. You have to sit down and have coffee. And I think you have to honor their concerns, but know that you will never convince them. What you need to do is get the 60% that if they had good information would actually show up and support the project. So I say spend your time winning over the people who have an open mind and getting them to show up and give, basically the voice and the political cover for the commissioners who, are used to having to listen to all the negativity and all the things that are wrong. So
on one of the episodes that we met with Vanessa Farr from a group called Haley Ward, she's involved with Build Maine as well. You probably met her. And they do these things called design sprints. And now I find myself in a real life example where I have to decide, do I want to do that, or do I want to just move forward with trying to get my engineering, my surveying and everything done, and then go submit that to the planning department? And my apprehension, I mean, these cases are all varied across the country, of course, but like in our community, we're looking at, and you might find this architecturally distasteful, but the way that the resources are here, we have to go in this direction with manufactured housing, but we don't want it to look like a trailer park. There are communities that you wouldn't even know it has a metal frame under it, the way it's set up on there, a bigger pitch on the roof so that people can walk up, things like that. But it still has the HUD, metal frame. Yeah. So I'm like, but the community hasn't approved that in over 20 years. And I find myself like, geez, if we go do a design sprint, we have all this buy-in and everything, and then bring it to the community, this could cause like 6 or 8 months of delay. Whereas maybe I should just come up with the most beautiful looking thing that we want to commit to, that we can financially do, because I do want it to look good. And I do want to create a sense of community like the one that we visited that we're modeling, where people are hugging each other around the mailbox. I mean, that's important to me. And a place where people are prideful to say that they live there. That's important to me. But maybe like we put that all together in the best way that we know it is and bring it forward, knowing that in the first meeting, we're just going to get a lot of, like, here's things you need to fix or change, and then go and do those. And I'm kind of curious, it seems to me what you're suggesting is we need to get involved with people earlier, but like, how do you balance that with the real life? Hey, we still have to do the survey, the wetlands analysis. I mean, these are bigger projects, maybe not as much for infill, but, that stuff all takes a lot of time. And if you wait to do it, then you're just pushing it further down the road. And I'm just
great question. And I would suggest a couple of things. I'm a big believer in co-authorship. And I think if people feel like they had a chance to have a little bit of a say or have an idea in a project, then they become ambassadors to get it done. So meeting with people, and you can't do a blank slate, but what we did on RiverHouse actually was did 3 different scenarios and sat down early with the planning director and the planning staff and said, here are 3 different things we could do. How do you feel about it? And what do you feel you could support? And one of them was like, well, that's a bridge too far. And that's really underutilizing a really interesting site. We think we could get behind this one in the middle. So they immediately had some buy-in and skin in the game to help make it happen, as opposed to the typical process where a developer figures out what they want to do, and then they add 20% because they know they're going to lose it in the public approval process. So they pass the site and sandbag it, and then they show up, and then it's, you
don't
arm
teach me any bad ideas.
Yeah. So, and so I think having community conversations, having meetings with staff. I mean, I met with planning commissioners early on. We now have a process, which I think is actually a good one, where you can have a workshop with the planning department, and you don't have to have a lot of stuff done, but you could have some sketches and you can sit down and say, here's what we're thinking. And you get immediately a read on, well, I'm really concerned. Do you have enough parking, or how's that really going to look? And you start to understand what their hot buttons are. So you can start to solve for that rather than taking it all the way through $100,000 worth of design and everything else, and then find that the basic premise was wrong, and then you're trying to retrofit. So I think there are ways. I think the sooner you can start testing ideas with people and getting their feedback is really, really important.
So not necessarily a whole design charrette where the entire community comes out to help you design what it is that you're going to bring forward, but more so coming up with some sensible options and then bringing those to the planning department early before you just submit your package to say, hey, what do you think?
Yeah, I'm probably going to alienate a lot of my brethren designers here. I've come to think of charrettes as charades. I think it's just, you have this come by you moment where there's all this speed and there's all this energy and frankly, a lot of theater around people drawing and all this kind of stuff. And everybody's all caught up in the moment. And then 6 months later, when you go to get it approved, everybody's forgotten that and they've fallen back on there, especially in small towns. So again, I live in a small town, and what we did was a series of conversations where we brought in experts. We ran a 4-month series, and we talked about mobility, we talked about urban design, we talked about economic development, and we talked about sustainability. And we'd bring in a speaker, and you'd get 100 people to come, and we would let a month pass, because where that work really gets done is it's the coffee shop and it's the bar. It's like, hey, did you go to that thing 2 weeks ago? Do you remember that guy talked about that? And then we did a workshop. And when we went to the workshop, then people would say, oh, remember the guy that spoke in May and he talked about, using VMT versus leveless or LOS as a way of measuring traffic. And so people had a common language, they had reference points, but they also had time to digest all this stuff. Versus the charrette where, these, incredible, talented people come in, but it's a fire hose of information and people are caught up in the moment, but they didn't really understand, the basis of what decisions are being made. So, and again, I think in these places where people are more reluctant, where they're smaller, where there's more, somewhat, connectedness to the community and the place, it takes time for that stuff to gestate. You can't solve it in a week, regardless of how great the watercolors are at the end of the process. So
that's great insight. I appreciate it. I think I want to wrap up with this because we've talked about another question that I had earlier already. But you talk about many people kind of become accidental developers by starting their own building or a small project. How can communities really lower the barrier for more people to participate in development? And why does it matter?
Well, I think it matters because I think the more you diversify ownership and the ownership, investment, and the many hands, make great places. So as opposed to one person owning everything you have, and one of the things that we see nationally, it's the small developers, sometimes the accidental developers, who really are the safe haven for the locally owned businesses, because the institutional guys want credit tenants, and a lot of the businesses that everybody wants to maintain their authenticity or to support the local entrepreneur can't go into that institutional grade building, but they can go into somebody who's taken on the effort to adaptively reuse an old mill into a series of micro retail spaces. So there's a real direct connection there, I think, between authenticity, stronger local economy, locally owned businesses, and the role of the small developer. Transparency of process is really key. So I think for a lot of people who are accidental developers or just getting started out, it's so labyrinthine to get through the approval process. So I think the cities have to work better at that. One of the things that we do here that I think is a great process, and I'd encourage any small town to offer this, it's called a one-stop. And so as a person interested in buying a site or doing a project, they bring all of the department heads together for an hour. And you can walk in and you can say, hey, I'm thinking of buying the lot on such and such, or here's a concept I've got. Tell me everything I need to know about it. So fire tells you, well, you're going to have to sprinkler the building and I'm going to need this. And utilities say, well, I checked it out and the sewer in that area is compromised. You're going to have to replace it. So in an hour, you get a lot of information to be able to be a lot more informed. More importantly, they are all in the room together talking about your project, and it's something you'll never see again. So instead of you having to chase everybody down and talk about what you're doing, and then you get one piece of information from fire and
What's
a different
the bar
piece of
that
information.
yeah, that's amazing. I'm
Yeah.
going to actually write my city council after we get off this to encourage
Yeah,
us
and
to
go.
do it.
Remind me,
What's
and
the
I'll send.
bar? Yeah, please do. And
I'll
what's
send you the
bar?
link because they have a simple questionnaire, and it's any. I mean, you can be buying a single family house you want to redevelop and put it in
And
there.
they'll stop all the department heads to come meet with you.
Department heads or departments, but they do their homework and they document it, and it goes in the file. And so now you've got kind of a common basis for everybody to understand. So I think that's
great.
the other thing. The other thing I'd recommend is, there's a number. The thing that, you hear a lot from people is, but we want to save this building, and why doesn't anybody do a coffee shop? And it's like, okay, if you'd like to do that, I want to do that, but put your money where your mouth is and invest in this thing. So a crowdfunding platform like Small Change, where people can, it's a non-accredited investment platform where people can invest as little as, I think it's like $100. It depends. But so think about if somebody wants to do a project, then getting the community, like we like to say Main Street versus Wall Street investment. If that's what you want and that's what you believe, then again, because the money for the small developers is always the hardest part. And, get the community banks to get behind that too.
I love
that.
So we covered a lot today.
Yeah. We always do. I always do.
No, it's, I appreciate that. And I want to make sure though, that if there are any thoughts or ideas that we might have missed that you want to share with the audience, I want to be sure to do that. And then also let folks know about your book, the title of your book, where they can find your book, or if you have books, I'm only familiar with one, and more information about you.
Yeah. Well, I think the thing that I would offer is in the last probably 18 months, it's been amazing how this is really blowing up in a good way. Last year I called the year that small became big, because I just felt like I had been speaking to and been to so many interesting places and different groups that were real fascinated with this idea. And I think this year it's even catching more momentum, whether it be legislative, sort of some nascent movement in the finance markets, which I think is really helpful. But I think communities recognizing it. And a lot of it is because the big projects are harder and harder to finance, let alone get approved. So I think there is this window of opportunity for small to really become big and become a big thing. The book is called Building Small, a toolkit, and you can find it on Amazon. You can also, probably the best place to go is just my website, which is jheid.com, jheid.com. And there you'll find a link to buy the book if you want. The other thing is you'll find information on the Small Scale Developer Forum, which is a twice a year gathering that I do in a different city of people who are small scale developers. Some of them are just getting started. Some of them are very experienced. We spend about 3 days. We look at projects. We hear case studies. And more than anything else, we provide each other moral support. The next one, which might be of interest to some of you because it's a more rural environment, is in Northwest Arkansas. And we're going to be visiting 3 towns and how place is becoming an economic development tool there. See a lot of variety of interesting projects, micro housing, cottage courts, kind of interesting mansion home hacks and all that kind of stuff.
What are the dates of that event?
That is October 5th through 7th.
Oh, we'll be airing this well before that. So hopefully folks listening might cue in. Would they find it on your website too? You
find that on my website as well. So if you just go to jheid.com, there's a tab that's called Building Small, and that has like all of it has the writings, the book, the small scale forums, some recaps. You can also visit. We have recordings. We actually live stream the forums.
Oh, great.
And this year, I don't want to spoiler alert, so I can't say it yet, but we've got a grant to actually cover the cost of the live streaming. So it'll be free to anybody. I usually charge for it. It'll be free to anybody because that was
That's excellent.
Their process. So I'll make sure you get that information and maybe you can push it out to your
Jim's democratizing development.
There we go. Trying
I love it.
Yep. Yeah. So anyways, so there's a lot there and a lot of resources. Oh, the other thing is social network for small scale developers and or people interested in this subject called buildingsmall.mn, like Mary Nancy .net. or .co. And that is, it's like a LinkedIn, but it's only for small scale developers. There's a lot of resources on there. There's chat, and the content from the forums is all on there too. So that's a great thing. It's free to join, and there's about 1,200 people on it. So it's kind of a nice network from all over the country. So yeah.
Jim, you were like an Energizer bunny for development. I love it. Thank you so much for your time today, from joining us. It looks like a bank vault in California.
It is. It's a co-working space I developed in an old bank. So this is one of our premium conference spaces. So I love it. It's always good.
We really appreciate your time, and thank you so much for these wonderful insights. We'll be sure to get this out broadly, and hope to see you around in the years to come as we improve the built environment.
You're great. Well, again, thanks for the opportunity. Great to meet you in Maine. Look forward to great things coming out of there. And yeah, if you're ever out this way, look me up. I'd love to share you or show you around.
I will, my friend. Thank you so much.
Okay.
Have a great day.
All right, Matt. See ya. Bye-bye. Bye.